John's going to be back there cutting over the 8 audio-visual equipment, and while he's doing that, good. I guess I'll give us all a welcome again. Come out today to worship Jehovah God and learn about our Creator, sing praises to Him and worship Him is why we've gathered here together today, right? I guess what I'm trying to say is, that we're going to we do these different acts of worship. We're trying to recognize our Creator for who He is, and for those who don't know this Jehovah God Creator, that's what we're trying to do today, right? We're trying to glorify Him. So, when I was selected for this to do a lesson up here up front, we call this preaching, delivering a sermon. So it got me to thinking about, well, what is this thing? What is this preaching? What is this sermon? Does this look familiar? I think we see it in many different religious organizations across the world. You get this person up here speaking, delivering a lesson. Is this something that we should be doing? Is this something the folks in the first century, I guess, would recognize? So that's part of why I'm doing this lesson. But there's a particular, subset that we need to discuss in more thoroughly. So preaching, what is it? So I'm kind of explained why I want to do a lesson on preaching. But we'll see here later on in the lesson that preaching and who's delivering the lessons and who's receiving the lessons helps us follow the example of Jesus. So in terms of the example of sacrifice He gave, I think there's some things to understand there. I like Matt's theme. He's looking about being disciples of Jesus, and there's different things that we can learn about Jesus' example. And I think that in preaching, in particular, we're going to find something about Jesus' sacrificial example. So I'll save that for later. Now, preaching is related to the Great Commission. There's ways we need to tell others about the gospel. We need to strengthen and reinforce ourselves. Matthew 28:29. Can somebody hand me my Bible? I left it over there. Matthew 28:29. Go therefore into all the world and make disciples of all the nations. And again, what we find here in 1 Corinthians 14:40, I'll just allude to that. Let things be done decently in order. So in the example of the church at Corinth, there was a little bit of discord about who was doing what, and the sequence of events. Well, preaching and trying to deliver that message and trying to keep things in order is one of the things we can do to try to further the message of the gospel. And to add to that, we've also got quite a bit of Old Testament precedent. Heralds announcing different news. I think the word term there was bisser, if I remember right. So you've got, contextually, you've got in the Old Testament these heralds that are announcing different news, different victories, defeats, whatever. But also moving on, I think there's also lineage within the synagogue. This was the type of thing that people were accustomed to coming out of the synagogue, right? You have these lessons being delivered. And finally, sermon itself is a method of teaching. So think of Sermon on the Mount. Jesus got up in front of folks and issued a lesson, right? So here's speaking about the Beatitudes and things like that. Jesus delivered a message that might look somewhat similar to what we're doing today, right? It's this single directional flow of information. So I guess first of all, I wanted to establish this is something we're allowed to do, and we should be doing, right? So I think if we can move beyond that, how does the world view preaching? How does the world view preaching? I think it's evident in many religious organizations, and it may be what's the word I'm looking for? Assumed, but there's also some different thought processes around preaching, about the method it's delivered and maybe even more importantly, who's delivering it. So that's kind of what I want to get into, because that speaks to the sacrifice of Jesus also. All right. So here today in the world, we got all kinds of social movements and senses of injustice. So I think I'll just click through a bunch of these real quick. And this might seem a little unusual to put this up in the context of preaching, but there's a reason why I'm doing so. You know, there's lots of things going on in the world that I would say that when we look at these things, especially in North American society, different things like woke, LGBTQ, civil rights, maybe not so recent slavery, abolition years ago, the Tea Party, NAMBLA, gun rights. All these social movements come from a sense of injustice, right? And you know, for some of these we may not know what they are. NAMBLA is a North American Man-Boy Love Association. It's about trying to establish a norm as a pedophile relationship. And when I look at this, each one of these has really, I think, a sense, a grain of, if not truth, at least a sense of injustice within each one, right? I think it's the folks who are behind these movements, whether they're, you know, what side of the spectrum they're on, people feel slighted that they're not having their voice heard, and I think that's maybe part of the problem that we see when we think about preaching. And you know, there's a real sense, I think, also behind these different movements that you know, when people feel slighted, it's for good reason, right? And I think it's incumbent on us to understand their point of view. And if I look in detail at one or two of these, you know, I just have maybe a little story to share about LGBTQ. When I was probably 4 years old, visited my dad's parents in Tennessee. And at the time, my dad's dad, my grandfather, was at a nursing home. And in that nursing home, there was a gentleman, and he was well known as a gentleman, in his 80s, maybe 90s, walking around in a skirt. And the people there were calling him names, calling him she-mammy, things like that. And this is 1975 Nashville, right? So in my child's heart, I saw that, and I cried inside the way they were treating this man. It was terrible, you know? But I guess what I've learned from that is, you know, this was 1975 Nashville looking back, and there was a reason why this fellow was doing what he was doing. He wasn't doing it because he liked being made fun of, but there was something inside of him that drove him to do this. Now, ultimately, you know, what we do with our desires inside of us, any one of these desires, if it drives us to sin, that's where, I think that's where, you know, that's where God would want to, that's where God's judgment lies, right? It's when that desire drives us to sin. So in any of these social movements and senses of injustice, there's reasons why people do what they do, but ultimately God is going to be the judge, right? And I don't want to look at any of these in a fashion that these are lesser people for what they are, right? I think it's important to recognize that people do the things they do for a reason, is what I'm trying to say. All right, so then I'm going to go down here for a moment, and I put in the Incas from the 1300, the Manchu Rebellion, and the Zulu Wars, because a lot of the stuff I have up here in the top left quadrant is North American type of social injustices, right? But the point I'm trying to make here is that social injustice has always been there. There's another common movement today that says European settlement is kind of responsible for all the discord in the world. Well, these injustices down here, and even the injustices we see here, predate European settlement. So the point I'm trying to make is that these senses of we're missing something in our life, whether real or imagined, has always existed. It's not something new, but it's happened. It's been there since the dawn of time, right? So Israel, we want a king. They got a king. Israel, we're tired of manna. Cain, Abel has the blessing. And finally, so what does this all mean to preaching? So we got a whole block of stuff going on here. Now, the National Organization of Women, ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, late 70s, right? Women's Lib, late 60s, 70s, feminism, Gloria Steinem, misogyny and patriarchy. So how do we sort this all out? This last block has everything to do with preaching, doesn't it? Because as we focus on preaching, our preachers in this building for the past 20 years or so, or more, has been Matt Hodge, Alan Nieder, Steve Brewer. All men, right? So why is that? Is that fair? And I think that as we look at misogyny and patriarchy, Those social movements would say that it's not, right? And we've seen some churches have I don't know, capitalized on this sense of injustice and done things that are maybe inappropriate. So I want to examine that today, not just why we preach, but who's doing it, right? So when we look at misogyny, according to some definitions, it's a hatred of, contempt for, or prejudice against women or girls. It's a form of sexism that can keep women at a lower status than men, thus maintaining the social roles of patriarchy. Misogyny has been widely practiced for thousands of years. It is reflected in art, literature, human societal structure, historical events, mythology, philosophy, and religion worldwide. There's a broad belief, and I think that, again, there's some root in truth in all this stuff, right? That women have been effectively treated as second-class citizens for many years in many different cultures and situations, right? So those flames are still being stoked today. Patriarchy, a social system in which the primary position of authority are held by men in the areas of political leadership, moral authority, and control of property. This sociologist defines patriarchy as a system of social structures and practices in which men dominate, oppress, and exploit women. Social stratification along gender lines, with power predominantly held by men, has been observed in most but not all societies. The concept of patriarchy is also related to patrilineity in the anthropological sense, although not exclusively. Can't say I understand all those words, but there's a lot written on these two topics out there, and there's a lot of wheels, a lot of traction under these movements, right? So, my goal at the end of this is to help us put the world's view in context with what we're doing here, right? And then explain, not just explain what we're doing or why, but at the end of it all, that God has a plan for this that is for our good and benefit, right? So just to maybe foreshadow a bit to what we're getting at. All right, so let's talk about God's design. Let's go to Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22. All right. So in Ephesians 5, verses 22 to 25 and 33, wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. And husbands, love your wife. And I'll stop right there, because I'm going to finish that verse in another reading. But finally, down to verse 33. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. Okay, so what we get out of that is, wives, submit to your husbands, and husbands, love your wife. I'll just move on without much more commentary than that, because there's going to be time for that in a moment. In 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 8 through 15. I desire, therefore, that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting, in like manner that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. 1 Corinthians 14. (34 through 36). It reads there, let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but they are to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their husbands at home, for it is shameful for women to speak in church. Or did the word of God come originally from you, or was it you that it reached? All right. So, so far maybe I'm not painted a particularly compelling picture. I'm laying out maybe some facts here, right? And these facts may seem a little stark at the moment, but I want to explain, I think, how the world would see this and how we're actually supposed to be operating in this space. Because I think there's a difference, I think, as we drill down in how we operate in this space, that provides the appropriate outcome for God's will and for us to thrive within it. Okay? Get to that in a moment. Ephesians 1:22, which we had in our reading from a few moments ago. And he put all things under his feet and gave him to be head over all things of the church. And finally, Colossians 1:18. Reads there, and he is head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he may have preeminence. Okay. And finally, going back to Ephesians 5. In verses 25 through 32. The latter half of the verse says, Christ loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body and of his flesh and his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is the great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. So what I get out of this is that we have a pattern established we've got the men who are charged with doing different leadership activities. Females who are to submit to their husbands. In fact, as we learn and understand these verses, this is the basis for why we have the folks preaching who are preaching, right? Male preachers, if you will. But ultimately, this plan is built for a couple reasons. First of all, it's modeled after the church itself. About Jesus is the head of the church, and the church are the people, right? So there's some evidence there that talks about that relationship. So if we go to the next slide, we have this system set up, right? And in practice, there's quite a few things. There's some things that can go wrong. We have men who say, "I get to be in charge." And that's kind of the basis of where this misogyny and patriarchy comes from, right? I would say the impact of that is they probably shouldn't be leading anybody anyway, right? If men take the attitude, I'm in charge now, do what I say, that's not what ultimately I think what needs to be happening here, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But they probably shouldn't be leading anybody. I can't be in charge, women, and even men, right? There's cases where men are not qualified to do certain activities. Those type of things result in contention. So, we've got this hierarchy established, this chain of command, if you will, and if people are not satisfied with that, they have a sense of injustice, well, we result in a contention here. And that's something that is not a good thing. I don't want to lead. We've got men who don't want to participate in leadership or be actively part of leadership. That results in a vacuum of leadership. And as a result, what happens in a vacuum? The vacuum finds a way of being filled, and it becomes a bit of a free-for-all. And finally, I don't want to follow, which applies to both men and women. That can result in deadlock and division. So it takes not just good leaders, but good followers for this arrangement to work. So far, I haven't made a very compelling argument, I think, in my opinion, about the gender of this speaker, if you will. I've laid out some stark facts from the Bible, but I really want to drill down and understand now, in practice, what it looks like when things go right. Because misogyny, patriarchy, the world would focus on, here's all the things that's going wrong, and that would validate the belief system, wouldn't it? But what can go right in this arrangement? Well, how should we take this teaching? Should we take it as, here's the plan, find something to like about it? I've kind of heard that in business before. And that's almost where we're at right now in the context of this lesson. Here's the plan, we should find something to like about it. That's not the case. That's not what I'm doing here. Or maybe the plan doesn't work. Maybe the plan doesn't work. I've, just to put that in context, I've heard many, many lessons in my time that talk about this type of arrangement. And, you know, those lessons, the preacher will immediately go into all these bad things that happen. Men do these bad things, and women kind of sit and endure it, right? And, you know, as a result of those lessons, they're lopsided, they're repetitive. You kind of walk away at the conclusion that maybe this plan doesn't work after all, right? On the other hand, knowing all this, how should we proceed? How should we proceed? Well, first of all, becoming a Christian involves giving up our free will. This applies to man, woman, everyone, right? So we're all equally culpable or responsible for giving up our will to God. So when we look at Matthew chapter 16, Luke chapter 23, talks about taking up our cross and following him. So we give up our free will as we become Christians and as we execute our Christian duties, right? It is kind of the step number one. Step two, all of God's instructions are ultimately for our benefit. 2 Timothy 3:16. Go there briefly. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, reproof, correction, and instruction in righteousness. That was something I recognized pretty early on when I became a Christian with the church here, that the things that God would have us do, we're not jumping through hoops by any means. We're not doing things because he's, you know, amused by our activities. These things exist to help us survive, to help us thrive. And if we do his will, we will do just that. We will thrive and flourish under the things he wants us to do. So even though I presented kind of a starkness to it so far, we're about to get into the benefits. We're intended to thrive in this arrangement, not just simply survive. So how to thrive? Number one, by obeying God. It's not a trump card, and I'm not intending that it should be taken that way. You know, we in obeying God, it is bending our will to him. It's demonstrating that we want to do what he wants us to do, and that will serve us in terms of what drives our attitude, in terms of what drives us internally, right? Our motivation. As we seek to do God's will, it forms our motivation. But also, now here's where the good stuff begins. These arrangements help us in our relationships. So what we see in the reading, husbands are sacrificing their own needs and wants for the needs and wants of his family. So husbands, in leading their family, they are doing things and trying to recognize what their family needs, and they're putting the needs of their family in front of themselves. Wives are sacrificing overt leadership, I would say, for running the house. And it's not, there's verses that talk about, managing the house and teaching the children. But I want us to think about, too, when I interviewed a few of the ladies coming into this lesson. And, you know, I was talking about, we've got this situation of male leadership and female is in submission. And one of the ladies told me, well, you know, I asked her, how does that make you feel? And she said, well, I'm kind of glad the men are doing this stuff because that frees me up to do a whole bunch of other stuff. And I want you to think about, you know, who's running the lists for, you know, if somebody needs a meal, right? It's probably not Matt, it's not John. It's usually coming from Cindy or one of the other ladies, right? So, you know, I want us to think about that. You know, the men, we're up here, we're having to prepare all this information. I can tell you it's not particularly fun. I'm pretty nervous. I forgot half of what I wanted to say. And that's something else, you know. Several of the ladies said, I'm glad I don't have to get up there. and do all this stuff, right? So in doing this, we're trying to lead and teach and understand what are the needs of the people around me, my family, the congregation. We need to be considering and understanding these things in order to be effective and work in our leadership roles. And by the same token, as we're trying to do those things, the ladies are freed up to run these activities for us, to help strengthen us as a church and family. So there's plenty of things that are happening that women are leading actively that men are not involved in, right? Because we're doing these other things. So it's a division of roles in a way and responsibility. I would say it removes contention, establishes the basis for a godly relationship. Helps us get along. That we're at ease, knowing we're looking out for each other's best interests. It builds trust. So as men are trying to understand the needs of their family, lead their family through the times we live in, the wife can sit back, relaxed, understanding, knowing that the men are looking out for them. And by the same token, the men can sit back and understand that the women are taking care of business on their behalf, right? So it builds, you ultimately build this trust in these relationships, right? And we see that in the godly marriages we have in the congregation today. You know, remember Chuck and Esther Floyd, and remember Jerry and Maxine Spencer, and we've got couples here that have been married for many years. They exhibit these characteristics. So, you know, when we execute things according to God's plan, our relationships are enhanced. It builds trust within us. And I want to say that, you know, at the end of it all, men and women are different, but not superior to one another. So I took a training at the company I worked with a couple years ago, and in that training, they brought out several different concepts, and it was about women in the workplace. And I thought, you know, this is probably going to be feminism shoved down my throat, but actually I got one really good thing out of it. They brought up some situations where they had a man speaking kind of a speech and doing strong language and saying, oh yeah, if we do this, then this will happen, and here's the vision, and here's how we're gonna execute on this. And they said, well, if we take that and took those same words and put a woman up there and had her say those same things, she would be viewed in a much different way than that man. And so that kind of opened my eyes a little bit, because there was a real ring of truth to that, because a lot of the women that I saw in the workplace at that point, I kind of looked at them and I recognized that they're very demure, very kind of laid back because of that reason, because of how they would be viewed if they were actually speaking in the same way a man does. So even my mind was shifted in the context of that training. Now, on the other hand, that training went on to dictate a number of different things, like here's what a tie means and stuff like that. And I thought it was all bizarre, but ultimately it gave me a respect that, you know, that some of this misogyny stuff does exist today, and even my own mind was shifted by it, right? But when I say men and women are different, but not superior, what I'm getting at there is that, you know, I think if we take a step back and use a little bit of common sense, despite the fact, you know, we're very similar in capabilities, we are different, right? There's been thousands of books written on the topic. Even, I think we have some scriptural basis for these differences, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And what I'm getting at is that, you know, women have a greater emotional capability than men. I didn't say liability. I didn't say are more emotionally strung out. I said a different emotional capability, right? They're more in tune with their emotions than men are. And so as a result, as a man is serving his wife, trying to understand her, it enhances our relationship, because he's trying to key into what his wife is feeling and understand her better, right? Because men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? We don't understand each other. So as we execute the godly plan, we are actively trying to understand each other, and especially men for women. Men, I can speak for myself, have a great sense of needing validated. We need to have somebody believe in what we're doing. Even it says in one of the readings that wives respect your husband. So as wives are giving that husband that sense of validation and respect, that helps us, and that helps us, again, trust each other. So this plan that God has put together has great benefits. And finally, looking to thrive in God's plan, it's not just thriving, it's flourishing. I'm going to take a step back for a moment and look at Genesis chapter 3. Genesis 3, I'll read through 3 through, I think, about 6. No, verse 1 through 6. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. I stress those words with her, because there's two things going on here. I think a lot of times we look at Eve as, and rightfully so, as committed a sin, that she's agreed to be tempted by this fruit and to partake of it. But Adam, who was with her, did nothing to intervene. Now, I've rarely, if ever, heard that before. That was kind of an eye-opener for me. But if in fact he was with her, which the text says, he did not protect Eve. And so as a result, we have the world we have today. I think the opposite of those things is if we had, think about our roles today, where we're at. If the women, if we're doing our jobs, we're not going to be, putting things in front of our husbands to tempt them. We're going to be executing the household well. On the other hand, if men are doing their job, they're going to do everything they can to intervene and protect, right? So there's kind of an echo back to this original sin, these arrangements we have today, and why we're doing what we're doing is my point. So as we move on, men, in thriving in God's plan, there's great joy in serving. As we lead, as we try to teach and understand, we're really being servants, trying to meet the needs of the people we're teaching. We're not up here trying to disseminate information just for the sake of it, right? What do we need? What does the family need? What does the congregation need? This is an act of service. And my encouragement for men is be the leader and protector. In this regard, there's great joy in being that leader and protector, in trying to understand the needs of your family and do what's right for them and see them grow and develop, and the people around you grow and develop too. There's great joy in serving others. For the women, again, there's great joy in serving. It's the same thing, right? So women, in your roles, you're going to be, like one of the ladies said, freed up to do things for others. We see a lot of that happening here today. So there's joy to be had there if we advance and claim these roles as our own, right? And that's where we give up our will. We go in defiance of what the world would tell us to do, and as we get involved in these roles and engrossed in them, this is something that is a joyful event. Again, look at all the married couples we have here today. They're a testament to how this plan works. Be the leader and helper. And finally, both are servants, but serving in different ways. This sets us up for heaven, because at the end of it all, again, this is the relationship of Christ to the church. And we shouldn't be in a position, I think, where we get to heaven and this arrangement seems strange to us, right? That we're going to be in submission to Christ. Well, if we're not practicing that here on earth, it's going to look strange in heaven, right? So this arrangement sets us up to be good tenants of heaven, I would say, right? Or helps maintain our admission thereof. So, conclusion. We learn about Jesus' example of sacrifice in understanding and engaging in godly relationships. Men were giving up a lot of what we want in life for the sake of those around us, right? Women were giving up overt name leadership basically for the same reason, for that, to be able to, because we're sacrificing. Men and women are equals in capability, but we should be following God's model for leadership. So in terms of what the world's looking out at us and the pressures being put on us by the world, I want to be very clear that we're equals in capability. I feel kind of stupid for even having to say that, right? But there's a lot of folks who would think that, men are better than women because they're in charge, or vice versa, right? We're equal in capability, but we follow God's model for leadership. Godly leadership and the relationship they foster are not a required drudgery or an injustice, but a system under which we can thrive. It's not something we just find something to like about. It's something that the proof within us, that we see amongst us, is giving us the benefit of following God's word. And finally, at the end of it all, I want us to walk away from this lesson with our dignity intact, with a sense of purpose. And none of us feel like an injustice has been foisted on us by this whole arrangement, that this plan can work if we engage in it the way God wants us to. So I hope that all made sense. I think I ran through it really quick, but I don't know. That's what we have for today. So at this point, we'll sing a song, and it's our time of invitation. If a member has need of the church to come forward, to articulate that need, or if somebody wants to become a Christian as well, now's the time to do so. It's never been a better time. So, Jeff, thank you.